Welcome to the Divine Feminine Revolution podcast, where women are magical and empowered. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Monday, psychologist turned transformational feminine business coach. This podcast is for you if you want to prioritize your own pleasure, face your fears, and manifest your desires. This podcast is sponsored by the Fearless Feminine Academy, where I teach women how to turn their trauma into their superpowers. My goal is to show women that we can heal our world by creating time and financial freedom by doing whatever the fuck we want. Are you ready for the Divine Feminine Revolution? Let's get vulnerable and go deep. I'm so honored that you're here. Hey everybody, welcome. I am super excited to introduce you to Kari, and actually I'm going to let her do her own brag intro, but I can't wait for this conversation. I've been looking forward to it all day.
Hey, well, hi everyone. My name is Kari Lu Cowell, and I am a dating coach for nerds. That's really open to like anybody who considers themselves a nerd or whatever. Like, I'm open to working with a lot of people, but essentially I make dating more joyful, more pleasurable, and way more easy than it is. One of the things that I found while I was online dating was that I really needed to be intentional about it and that I needed a system. So I created a system because like the things that are important to us and valuable are time and money. And usually everybody's short on those things. It doesn't actually matter how much time or money you have. So it's just like, okay, well, as a woman, like usually the money part isn't as big of a deal because hopefully you're getting treated on your dates. But the time part is a huge deal. And I feel like as women and as social creatures, and usually the ones who are keeping the schedules, like we're very, very short on time. So one of the things that I put into place in my system, and this is probably like my biggest brag, was so I like to date like super nerdy guys who are usually socially awkward. So I give them 30 minutes. And if I wasn't feeling it after 30 minutes, I really learned how to like gracefully be like, you know what, you're great. This is not what I'm looking for. And I just bounced.
That's such a great skill. It feels like that could help you in any area of life to like be able to catch on quick and then like make a quick exit. That's so exciting.
Yeah.
Do you work with men and women? Because I'm thinking I might have like one or two people I can refer you.
I do actually. I work with men and women. So I currently have about half and half. So
That's exciting. Yeah, I think I have a couple people in mind. You know, my background is a psychologist, and so that's something I work with quite a lot. And it's really hard for an introvert, especially if you're kind of like nerdy. You know, you've got the perfect background there with your bookcase and everything. It's hard to put yourself out there.
yes, it can be for sure. I think I'm lucky in that I'm like more extroverted, but I definitely can tend towards the introvert scale, which I think is part of why online dating was really successful for me. And I think it's why it's really successful for a lot of people, especially the people who are introverted, because it can be so easy to like hide as much as you want or like present yourself as much as you want in the online space. And obviously, it probably depends on like what kind of nerd you are, but I think we're all like, if you're nerdy, we're all like a little bit like tech savvy, like more tech savvy than a lot of people. So like it's really easy for us to be in that space.
Yeah, I always joke that I met my husband the old-fashioned way because we met at a bar, but certainly the online space is like a lot kind of safer and like, you can screen out a lot of people, like, you have access to like a wider pool of people. So I think that that's really an awesome option for people. And I've had several clients over the years who like found love, gotten married, like the whole bit from online dating.
Yeah. Well, and I actually, it's so funny because it used to be Spark People and now it's OkCupid.
Mhm.
And so I was on Spark People back in like 2004.
Mhm.
And I would use it because I moved around so much. I think I've been in LA, I'm in Los Angeles. So I've been here now for 6 years. And this is the longest I've stayed in one place. So I would actually use OkCupid to like find friends because I was like, well, I don't know anyone here, and I'm not a bar person, so I'm like, I'm not going out to bars. So how do I meet people? So I'd use the like friend option on the dating site to find friends, and I met my best friend off of there, and she met her husband off of there, and I met my current partner off of there. So it's all like, oh, OkCupid worked for me.
Yeah, Yeah, I've had a similar experience. I think OkCupid is great because it has networking, and there's a couple other different apps like Over and a couple other ones that are kind of about like the friendship piece. Because I think nowadays what I see is like one of the biggest existential triggers for people is that they're really lonely.
Yeah. Well, especially in these COVID times too, because I think you're East Coast, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, I don't know what it's like out there, but Los Angeles is still pretty locked down. And I know quite a number of places, at least in the US, are still pretty locked down. And it can be lonely and exhausting and stressful right now.
So, like, you have like a really interesting life story. Like, tell us a little bit about your journey to get to this point.
Yeah, well, it's a very long and windy one.
Well, take your time. I like give us all the goods.
We'll take my time. So I actually, we'll just start childhood and I'll try to keep it in like a walnut sized package. I'm a transnational transracial adoptee. So I was adopted into a Caucasian family.
Mhm.
And and honestly, like there was a lot of trauma there. My mom was very codependent, and I think that had a lot to do with her inability to not have children.
Mm.
That was like her life goal. She was born in 1950, so that was like the thing to do and what she wanted to do. And I think that really affected her mental health when she couldn't do that. Um, and I mean, like, not to say that her adopting children wasn't fulfilling, but I just don't think like mom was the role that she was meant to fill without the help that she needed to like kind of work through that. Like, I think she was very depressed. So there was a lot of trauma there, a lot of emotional abuse. And then I left, like I bounced when I was 17. I'm like, I'm going to college, like I'm out of here. I grew up in Wisconsin. So I moved all the way out to Los Angeles. So technically this is like my second stint in LA. And I kind of just made my own way. Like I was brought up to be very independent. We weren't financially well off. So like when I was 13, my parents are like, if you want to go to the movies with your friends, you got to get a job. So I've been working since I was 13. And then like when I moved out to LA, I kind of had like this like existential crisis because I came out here for acting, but like my parents didn't support it. And like, I mean, like, when you're 17, 18 years old, your friends don't care. So like I didn't have like that like friend network of support either. So I kind of freaked out and I was like, okay, what can I do? Like, what'll make me feel safe? And I decided to go into psychology. And it was just a very natural
Nothing
thing
like
for
a
me to
codependent
do.
mom to get you into psychology, right?
I know, right? Right. Well, yeah. And it was such a natural thing to do because I'm sure, part of part of my skill came from having a codependent mom, but I was my friend's therapist anyways. So I was just like, all right, well, I might as well turn this into a career that'll make me money.
Exactly.
Um, and it was great because it's definitely a subject that I'm still interested in. Um, but college was really just like the time where I really like worked on exploring and finding myself. Like I am fully of the idea that like after you graduate high school, you need to go do something else that's not school because
Mhm.
I studied abroad in Kenya and I had so many interests and I was just like I came back. So I studied abroad in my junior year of college and I came back and I'm like, I don't actually know what I want to do. Like what? So I was like, let me just finish up my credits so I can graduate from college and say like, this is done and figure something else out. So after college, I moved out to the East Coast. I was in Rhode Island and I did a year of volunteer work with AmeriCorps with this wonderful program called City Year. And I gained a lot of leadership skills there. And then it was finally, oh, it wasn't. You know what it was? One of my friends came back from that I met at USC. That's where I went to undergrad. And he was also a psychologist or working on becoming a psychologist. And he was like, I am working with this new startup company that does behavior ABA with autistic kids. Like, come work for us. So I did that. And I was like, I need to do more. Like, I can't just like be in these houses, like, coaching the kids and coaching the parents. Like I really want to get into the shit, right? And so I applied to a doctorate program and I was like, I'm not interested in research. Like I'm not a science-based person. I'm like all humanities, like very intuitive. And so I went for PsyD programs and I ended up back in California in Fresno. And I was really interested in play therapy and child psychology. And it was a lot. And it was grad school was like, and I don't know if you had this a similar experience, but I loved grad school. Grad school was so much better than undergrad because I was just focused on the one thing that I was passionate about, that I wanted to do. I didn't have to worry about, I mean, like, I had to take stats, right? But like, I didn't have to worry about like taking like geology or like, right, yeah. But I didn't have to worry about taking these classes that I didn't care about. And the interesting thing about it was that I was in it and I was in my practicum and I was like, and it was great. Like I wanted to work with the juvenile delinquent population. So I was in like a group home for kids getting out of juvie, and I wanted to work with sex offenders. So I was working with juvenile sex offenders and incorporating play therapy and really like doing things that were not part of the normal curriculum for that population. And it was just, and I also like, I wanted to write my dissertation on human sex trafficking, which at the time I was in school, I was in my doctoral program from 2007 to 2009. And at the time, like human sex trafficking wasn't even an issue. Like nobody really knew about it. I mean, like there were still some things written on it, but I didn't get a whole lot of support on that. And working in the system, I was like, I can't change these children unless the system is also changing. And I was like, I can't do this. And it wasn't, and I always felt like weird and out of place. And I thought like maybe like the school I went to definitely had like administrative issues. So it's probably more frustrating than I wanted it to be, because I'm like, I should just be frustrated about school. I shouldn't also be frustrated about like student loans and like all this other stuff, right? So I thought maybe it was the administrative stuff that made me feel like out of place. But I asked a girl in my cohort, I asked one of my friends, I was like, do you ever feel like you're in the wrong place? And she was like, no. And I'm like, okay, that's just me then. It's me. And I thought about transferring somewhere else, but I was like, I think I just don't want to. So I was 2 years in and I left because I was like, this isn't what I want to do. If I can't change the system holistically, these kids are never going to change. And I mean, like they might, but it's going to be a lot more difficult and more challenging for them. So I was like, I can't. Like, it was just way too overwhelming for me. And I mean, like, thank God for people like you, Megan, because there is like, it takes a certain quality of person. And like, I'm not one of those people. I'm just way too sensitive for that.
Well, I hear you, and I'm sensitive too, and that's actually how I got into coaching. Was I was really starting to burn out doing so much like trauma work, and I think you bring up a really good point, which is like systemic change. So, luckily, the PhD program that I was at, and this happened a little more towards the time I was graduating, but they really have a focus on social justice, and so it's like, especially for kids, because they have like so little control over their lives. Like if you're not making systemic change, then like you're just like kind of like doing the same thing over and over. It's just not very like effective one by one, because there's so many people who like need help. It's really about like changing the violent structures, the patriarchy, the oppression, like all of those things.
Yep. And it's just like, okay, well, maybe I can help you with your trauma around because especially when children like offend sexually, like it's usually because they were offended upon. And I was like, maybe I can help you with that, but that doesn't mean the other behaviors that caused you to land in juvie aren't still there. And it's like, there's so many mitigating factors with people in that situation that unless the system changes, it's just so challenging for them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I left and I sat on my ass for 6 months because I was very, very fortunate. At the time I was with somebody and he was supporting me through grad school. And I mean, I took out loans, but like he really carried the bulk of like the everyday bills, right? And he was incredibly supportive around the change. And he was just like, take your time to figure it out. And I got really into knitting. So I sat on my butt and watched a lot of TV and knit a lot of things. And that was a good 6 months. It was a good 6 months. And what I realized like after taking that break was that the same girl that I had asked, like, do you ever feel out of place? She had also asked me, like, before I left the program, she was like, hey, there's this dinner theater that I was thinking of trying out for. Do you want to do this with me? And I grew up, like, I started acting when I was 6 years old. And obviously I tried to go to college for that. And that was it. And I was sitting on my ass for 6 months and I saw this announcement for the dinner theater for auditions, and I was like, oh yeah, that was something we were supposed to do together. And I'm like, you know what, like, let's try it. Let's see what happens. And I remembered like that was who I am. Like, that's what I do. And that's what I love. Like, not that I wasn't passionate about psychology, but that was more of like a intellectual passion than like a deep soul passion. And from there it was amazing, because I think at that point it was around like 25, 27-ish, and it was such a crazy life change. Did a bunch of shows there, re-enrolled in like the local community college, because I was like, well, I haven't acted since I was 17 and it's been like 10 years. Should probably get some training on this again. Um, and it was great. And I was like, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. And then my boyfriend at the time and I, who was supporting me, we broke up and we were in a lease. So we had to live together for a while. And again, he was super great and super supportive. And he was like, I- when our lease ended, he was going back home to Pennsylvania. And I was like, well, what do I do? Because I have hundreds of thousands of dollars in student debt now. Um, and and to pay that off, I was like, I have to get a full-time job. I have to get a full-time job to pay these off. So now what? Because how can I follow my dreams and get the training that I need to go back into acting? I mean, I guess I could have also just acted, but like it's a longer, harder road, I feel like, without the training, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so I decided I'm gonna live out of my car, because if I don't have to pay rent, that essentially covers my like student loan payments, and everything else should be covered, because it wasn't like I could go get a full-time job, but I could definitely support myself on a part-time job if I wasn't paying rent. And my
Say
ex
quick
is
that gosh,
what's
what
that?
kind of like flawed system do we live in that you have to decide between like paying your student loans or like having a roof over your head? I
Right.
just want to like hit that
Yeah.
point really quickly.
Oh yeah. It's it's crazy. And I've come to accept, I'm like, I'm gonna be paying these off forever.
I
So
hear
like thank God for like the like income based repayment, because otherwise I'd be paying like $3,000 or something crazy every month in student loans. And I know the idea is like, you go get a job where you can pay these back, but even that like idea is just so fucked up, right? It
Yeah,
doesn't
I would
allow, it
definitely
doesn't
vote
help the
for
girl.
any candidate that says they're gonna, get rid of student loans and forgive them. Like, I'm all for that. You got my vote.
Me too. But
Mhm.
yeah, so that was a choice I made. And my ex at the time, like, again, super supportive, really great man, uh, said, because I think at the time I was still unemployed, because he had been supporting me this whole time. So when we broke up, he was like, I'm gonna give you 6 months. I will pay all of your bills that are like the must-have bills. So like my student loans, not my rent, because I was gonna be living out of my car, like food, things like that, like all of the must-haves. And he's like, you get 6 months to figure it out, and I'll pay all of your bills and just figure it out. And I was like, okay, cool. Like this gives me time, because that's what I needed. I just needed time. And what happened was I ended up, well, okay. So what happened was I really fell for this other guy like later, and he was just a shitty guy, but he was that type of person, those relationships where you get into them and you're just obsessed. And you're like, I need to be with this person all the time, and I need to do everything that they say, and I just need to be like constantly available for them. Like when they say jump, you say how high. And that was like, it got into a relationship with someone like that. And I I was at a party out in the country. So my school is in Fresno, so there's a lot of like farmlands and stuff out there. And my friend's parents lived out in the farmland. And we were out there for a party. And this guy texted me and he's like, hey, I'm available now. And I'm like, I gotta go. I gotta go and be with this guy. And it was like 30-minute drive away. So I hopped in the car with my friend who had come with me, and I was like busting 90 miles per hour down these backcountry roads. And the entire time I'm just watching like the fields whiz by, and I'm like praying to God. I was just like, please just keep us safe. Like, that's all I like. I'm gonna still drive 90 because I'm crazy, but just keep us safe. And I got pulled over, got this like $600 ticket, and I'm supposed to leave. I'd gotten accepted into a conservatory, which is like elite acting school. And I was like, fuck, like how am I supposed to pay this off? I don't have a job. I'm living out of my car. I'm supposed to be moving away for school. Like, what the fuck am I supposed to do? And so I'm a pole dancer. And I've been doing that. I did that when I was in grad school. I taught it for a little while when I like after I quit grad school. And one of my friends that I taught with, she was like, "Oh, just go to the local strip club. They have amateur night, and like go with a friend, because if you're both up there and one of you wins, you can just split the pot." And I was like, "An amateur night, I think the pot ended up being like 300 or $400." So I was like, "Cool, if I do this twice, like I'll be able to pay off my ticket. Even if I go with a friend, I'll at least pay off like half of my ticket, right?" And so we go there, and she's just like super cute little thing. She's like a model and everything. So she won both times, and like the strippers and the management were just like super in love with her, and they're like, "Come work for us, come work for us." Sat there and I was like, maybe I need to do this. Like, even if even if I only make like $100 or $200 a night, it's way more than what I'd be making in like a part-time retail job, right? So that's what I did, and I did that for 4 years. I was a stripper for 4 years, and it was so, I mean, it was a lot. Like, I definitely learned a lot of lessons. I learned how to manage my money, because I definitely, and I feel like, because you hear these stories about women who do this for a living and like how they're broke, but it is so easy when you're making 200, 300, $500 in like an hour. It is so easy to get into this mindset of like, let me buy this Gucci purse because I can make this up in like under 2 hours, right? And I obviously had a goal because I was doing that so I could pay my student loans through my acting school. And I was like, no, like you get like two things that are like, like the dream buys, like those big purchases. And then you get back on track because you're here for school. You're not here to like buy Gucci bags, right? Um, but I learned how to stick up for myself. I learned how to be, I don't want to use the word clandestine, but like how to be soft, like soft nose. Um, I learned hard nose, which was a really good lesson to learn. And even just like physically, I learned how to physically stand up for myself. And like I'm 5'2" and like 130 pounds. Like I'm not very big. So most people are bigger than I am, but you figure out how to make it work with what you have. And it was just such a good life lesson. And it created a life for me that allowed me to be in school, not have to worry about paying my bills. I went to school up on the central coast of California, so it's wine country. So I was able to drink a lot of wine. And it was really, really good. And honestly, like Megan, I highly suggest like all women do this because you learn so many things and it is so empowering to be in this position of I can make you give me your money without really having to do anything but like be myself or like whatever version of myself you want, right?
Yeah, I used to cocktail waitress, and that definitely taught me some
Okay.
assertiveness moves for sure. I'm kind of, I'm really interested in objectification theory. And so I think, sex work is like a really big feminist issue. And I think we sort of like have a little bit of a double standard there. So, like, what was your experience of like, did you feel like objectified? I mean, it sounds like overall you felt like it was like pretty empowering as far as being able to set boundaries for yourself. Like, tell us about that.
It is. It's objectifying because they're paying you for essentially just being sexy. And there is an element, and I mean this depends on the girl, but like I worked in a smaller town and I am a very private person. So like I made up a persona, I made up like a whole background. I mean, honestly, like it was the best acting job that I ever had because I had to be in it all the time and I was getting paid a lot of money to do it. So but there are other girls who are just very open about like who they are and what they do. I'm just not one of those people. I I will do a lot for money. So like it just never, what bothered me was the entitlement of people and not just men. Like women were actually a lot of times worse than men. The entitlement to objectifying my body more than the actual objectification of my body. Because I'm like, I was actually like, I hit puberty around like 12, 13 years old. Um, I mean, like at the time, my boobs weren't huge, but like for middle school, they were pretty big. And like I've been sexualized for like since puberty, like since I hit puberty. And it was always one of those things that I kind of knew was like the card in my pocket. And I knew I could use that to like get the things that I wanted. So it was really like stripping's just an extension of that for me. Um, so I don't have a problem with it. The friend that I started stripping with, and we pulled in another one of our friends as well. So like I'm part of the BDSM kink community.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, for them, like that's their kink. Like they're like, we love being objectified. Like this is fantastic because we're getting what we need like on that level. And we're also getting paid for it. So I think if it's a choice, because there's obviously some situations out there where it's not a choice, but I think if it's a choice, like it is incredibly empowering. I say this with the caveat that you need to have the gumption to stay away from drugs, alcohol, and you need to have like the stability mental health wise to deal with the trauma, because like I absolutely was, and I really wish we had a different word for it, but I was absolutely sexually assaulted like in the club. And that's not like there was no, well, actually, I was gonna say there was no penetration, but there was one lady who was really handsy. But it wasn't like assault, it wasn't violent, it wasn't penetrative, but it was definitely touching, unwanted touching, right? So I wish we had like a word that was kind of in between that didn't portray violence, because that wasn't what it was.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, and that's kind of what we would do, like, in counseling settings. Like, if you ask people, like, if they were raped or assaulted, a lot of times people will say no, but if you ask
Yeah,
people, "Have you had an unwanted sexual experience?" Pretty much universally, people will say yes to that. And so I think
right.
that, like, really brings up the rape myth of, like, I think women a lot of times are, like, raised to be hyper vigilant, to, like, be on guard for an attacker, and certainly that
Mm.
does happen, but like more often it is this like unwanted sexual experiences. It is, but usually by someone you know or like an acquaintance or something like that. Um,
Yeah,
so here we like live on guard when really like it's like it doesn't prepare us for the reality of like that it's all around us, right?
right. Right, exactly. Well, and like, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I actually do have that experience, not like in the club, right? Because the club is strangers. It's just like there is a certain entitlement that comes with, and an idea, because even the managers who, I mean, I loved some of them more than others, but definitely one manager was like, well, it's part of the job. Like, what do you expect? And I'm like, okay, like, yeah, that is the standard. And also, like, I should be able to expect better, because like people just need to learn that like strippers are people, and like cool, come in and watch us take our clothes off, like that's really great, like I'm glad you're getting off on that. But like also, I mean, like, yeah, there are girls who turn tricks in the club. There are girls who are okay with having those touches. The smart ones say pay me an extra $20 and you can touch my boobs, but regardless, like it needs to be a conversation, as opposed to just like this expectation that it's okay. But I did have a friend who, and again, like I hesitate to use the word assault, because we identify assault with something violent, and it was not that. But he was a massage therapist and a Reiki healer. And like I was in town visiting one day, and I was like, you know what? Like I've never had Reiki done. Like and I could totally use a massage. Like let's do it. And he was just like, I won't charge you if you don't, like if we just do it on my bed, because he didn't want to pull out his table, because that's like a process. And I was like, yeah, cool, even better. I get it for free. Like, let's do it. And like he touched me a lot in places that I didn't want to be touched.
Yeah,
And
can
like
I jump in
what do
here?
you do?
I
Yeah.
I am a big fan of Reiki. I'm a Reiki master teacher, but I recommend it. I think it's a great supplement for therapy work. But I will say it's like super important to get a recommendation. There's not like a real like licensure certification process around it. And so like just anyone can get it in like a couple hours. But I do find that there are these dudes that like, oh, I'm a healer, and they totally like take advantage. And I feel like that is just like the worst bastardization of like what's a really very like sacred healing process. So I'm like really glad that you brought that up because that's one of my big soapbox moments because it's so vulnerable. It's like in therapy, like you don't, that shouldn't ever turn sexual,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so, well, actually, so funny thing is I'm actually a Reiki master myself.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And when I was going through my first training, I had to have a big conversation with my Reiki master about that, who's a dude. And I had to be like, and it didn't occur to me until I was like 2 or 3 days from like actually taking the training. And I was like, oh no, there's still stuff. Like, cause I felt like, do I want to be a part of this energy system that like obviously was very toxic for me? And so we had to have this big long conversation about like what that meant. And I talked to a couple other like female Reiki masters and like, just really getting that assurance that like, no, like this healing system is healing. That guy just happened to be a really shitty dude,
Yeah.
you know? So, but yeah, it is interesting because I feel like we need that in between word that's not associated with violence because it's usually not. Like any sort of sexual assault is usually not violent. It is, like you said, like somebody that you know, and usually somebody that you trust. Because like this guy was my friend. Obviously, I trusted him, and
There's actually some research that says that like length of time of knowing someone actually is not an indicator, which if you want to talk about a scary fact, I worked as a victim advocate when I was putting myself through grad school. And so a lot of times like people had known these people for years and then just one day it happened. And so that, I mean, honestly, that freaks me out more than the whole like someone's going to jump out and grab you moment, is that like, can we really trust the people around us?
yeah.
Oof, that's intense.
Well, and it's funny because I had like, so when I started stripping, I actually practiced yoga a lot because it kept me in that good like mental health place when I went into the club. Mostly so like I'm a pretty fiery, like very strong woman. So like it kept me mostly from murdering people because I obviously knew on top of like all of the stereotypes and ideas that we have about strippers, like just murder in general would get me in trouble. So it kept me from that. But I started off with my mindfulness practices, like, for a few years before I like met this guy and we started hanging out. And obviously so many more years after this happened. And so afterwards I was like, no, we need to process this. Like, let's talk about this. And so we had this conversation and he was like, oh no, like this was premeditated. Like I asked you to do it on my bed. So, and like not pay me so I could do this. And I'm like, you are a fuck. Like I am so out. Like this is insane. Like, and I, for a long time that just like destroyed, well, that and like the guy that I was telling you about that I was obsessed with, but it just destroyed my trust in people. Cause I was like, how could you even do that? Cause I come from the like core belief that all people are good.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I don't even understand. Like I would understand if it's like, okay, this girl, cause he was giving me a massage and Reiki. So like I was naked on his bed. And so I'd understand if it was just like, oh, you're naked and like now I'm kind of turned on. So like, let's see, because like we didn't have that discussion. So it was like, let's see what happens, if I try something. Like, okay, like I understand that. But to like go into something with this like premeditated idea that like you're going to do this, like that's just disgusting. Ugh.
Well, and I think everybody makes like consent seem so hard, but I've definitely taken some sexual workshops and it's just about saying like, is this okay? Are you into this? Do you like this? And then if someone says yes, especially like, in that scenario, you get like, it wasn't like a formal appointment or whatever, like if we had just like asked for consent and you had been willing, that could have had a totally different vibe to it. But
Yeah.
people like, I don't know why people are so scared to talk during sex, but like, consent is so powerful because it can really make sex so much better just by adjusting like little tiny moments.
Well, and I can imagine how like, so you said you were a Reiki master as well, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you imagine like being in that energy and like having that consent? Like I'm like getting turned on thinking about it right now because like it's so sexy, right? Like
it's really powerful energy for sure. Yeah. Sexuality can be so sacred, right? I mean, and I think this is one thing that I would like to tell people is like, you know, like to each his own, like whatever, like, choices you're into, that's cool. But you're also like opening up all your chakras and like you're like literally like linking energy with people. And they say something, I've heard something like, you stay connected people for 7 years after you're done
Yeah.
being partnered.
Yeah.
And so it is like really might make you rethink who you're hooking up with, like
Right?
legit, like energetically hooking up with.
Yeah, no, seriously. I've read that somewhere too, and I'm like, okay, well, like I think at this point I've cleared out most of the shit. So that's
Yeah, me too.
but yeah, so that's essentially my story. When I moved to LA like the second time, I stopped stripping and I considered going back into it because man, like I don't know how much you know about Los Angeles, but it is a tough city. And it really is. Like I came out here for acting and I came out here with $10,000 in savings because I knew it would take time for me to find a job and everything. I blew through that in like 6 months, and it is so easy to do out here because everything is so freaking expensive.
Um,
And I'm not like I'm really not. So I talked about a Gucci purse earlier. Like I bought myself a Coach purse. I'm really not like a name brand person, but I like things that have like that are like high quality with lifetime guarantees that are also feel really good because like I'm a highly sensitive person, so like I just need like things that feel good. And so I'm not like out here like spending loads of money on like crazy shit. Like I don't feel like my $10 nachos from Denny's should have broke the bank, but if you do that enough times and put that on top of like rent and student loans and like all the other stuff you have to pay for in LA, like you can blow through money so quickly.
so I'm kind of curious, like, talking about sales, I think that that's a big challenge for people, especially in the coaching industry. So, like, any fearless feminine sales tips that you've learned along the way being in those environments? Like, because I feel like, money is it's just like green energy, right? But we have like so much baggage around it a lot of times.
I think it's definitely changing your mindset around money. And that's something that I had to work on coming from a family where money was always lacking. Like
Mhm.
I did a lot of meditations around being in abundance and calling in money and being open to receive money. And when I spent money, saying whatever I spend will come back to me like tenfold or threefold or however many fold you want it to come back. Um, I also, because I actually have a big background in retail sales, so the hardest part for me is always selling myself.
Mhm.
And that was a big thing with stripping too, because I did have, and it wasn't body shame necessarily, but it was I love my body, but somebody else might not love my body. So I don't know if I want to like write that consent piece that we were talking about. And that's really what I think it was. If this person in the club is not consenting to see my body, I don't want to inflict that on them, right? So I really had to get over that. Um, and it was about looking at budgeting and being okay with and strict about, and maybe not strict is the right word because I can't say that I'm strict with a budget now, but definitely knowing myself more and knowing that I am kind of flexible around my budget. So maybe bumping up like the disposable cash amount in my budget a little bit more just to make room for that, like, oh, here's a book that's like $20 that I want. Okay, well, it's like not in my budget, but like I really want it and it's on sale. So now is like the good time to get it. And just kind of having that like cushion. So like
A
when
luxury.
that happens, yeah, when that happens, I can be like, okay, like maybe this isn't in my budget, but I know that I have budgeted for these things that like aren't in my budget.
What you were saying about like not inflicting your body on someone, it kind of made me think about like visibility and visibility wounds and fears. And I think especially around selling, like I think especially for women, there's this like kind of like passive aggressive thing of like, oh, I'm selling, but not really. Like, come click this link, but don't look over here. And it's like
Yeah.
I found that like you really have to be bold and loud and over and over and over again to like get the sales flowing. So like any visibility tips? I mean, you think about stripping like that, you're like, totally visible. And I think especially if you're a sex
Yeah.
worker, a lot of times that's a part of advertising. But like you're visible in that same way with a personal brand because it's you.
Mhm. And it is the same way. And I do have that like, I don't want to say it's resistance because one of the things I did learn with stripping is you just kind of you have to do it. Like you just have to do it. And the
Mm.
only way out is through. So like the more you do it, I'm going to actually look this up because I don't want to botch it. But I was working with this coach and she said this thing that was it wasn't like groundbreaking, but it was definitely like, oh yeah, like this is something to remember. And she said, here it is. Confidence is a result of action, not a prerequisite. And that is something I come back to over and over and over again, because the more you do it, the more you become comfortable with it, the more you create these neural pathways in your brain about becoming comfortable with it. And what I found so I just started this dating coaching business of mine last month. And I already have 2.5 clients. One woman who's interested in working with me is in the middle of a move right now. So we decided to revisit after she's settled in. And I'm like, dude, like, and it's so easy to get into this mindset of like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I just started this and I'm a failure. But I'm like, I just started this 4 weeks ago and I already have like 2 clients and one potential client who's like definitely like in it. Like she's just not in the right timing right now. Right. And I'm like, oh, that's actually really good.
That is
Um,
amazing.
but what I found with the marketing and the sales in this one was like, I'm not actually selling. I'm just telling. So I'm on Instagram for this
Mhm.
business and I'm just telling my story and telling people tips. Like I started doing a lot more lives now. And I'm just telling people like who I am and what I've gone through and how I can help. And that's really what's been the attractor, like the magnet. There's no sales. Like I see, and I'm not saying this is like a bad way to do it. It's obviously very effective, but I see all these, like Invisible AF or whatever. I see all these like, do you want more money or do you want more pleasure? Or do you want this? And like, yeah, obviously those answers are yes, but like it doesn't sit right with me. I don't think that's really like the way that I want to do it because it still feels, especially coming from like a retail mindset, it still feels very predatory. And I'm not saying it is. Like I definitely have my own work to do around that. And if it works for you, like cool, like keep doing it, but it doesn't work for me. And so like my thing has just been like, let me tell people my story. Let me tell people my message. Let me just be out there. Let me tell them what's helped me in the dating world. And that has clearly attracted people. And I'm like, I can do this. Like this feels comfortable because I'm not asking anyone what they're lacking, which is like really like the piece that I have issue with. Cause I'm like, well, you're not lacking and you don't need someone to make your life happy, but it makes it like maybe not better, but like it makes it more vibrant, right? It's like having a cake that's already fully iced and decorated and then putting a little tiara on top, right?
Yeah,
Um,
I had some struggle with that around like the pain points. And I feel like sometimes this can be like really manipulative and coercive around
yeah.
like, let's really trigger the shit out of people. And then, oh, by the way, like you need my coaching. And like,
Mhm.
that doesn't feel good to me. And I think that's like kind of a more masculine paradigm of, like the original kind of like snake oil sales people sort of
Yeah.
show. But I love to see like women rising because I love what you're saying. Your story really like you do get to just show up and be yourself and get paid to do it, but get paid well to do it. If you have that belief system, and so I don't think you need tricks and like,
No.
maneuvers. And I don't think you have to overly trigger people. Like, people want to find love. They want to show up. They want to like make money. They want to do these things. It's not like we have to like coerce them.
Right. And and all of my clients that I'm working with, I'm like, no, they're my perfect clients, which I'm so grateful for. But they're also just perfect. Like they're just such perfect human beings because they have this shit that they want to work on and they want to like be better at, I mean, I don't know if be better is the right thing, but they want to be better human beings and put themselves in a place that will set them up for success in the dating world. Because a lot of what I do isn't even like I do online dating profile audits and we go through and like, we'll reword things and reframe things and all of that stuff. And we do some of the like, what are your top 10 qualities that you're looking for in a lifelong partner, goal setting and things like that. But really, like the biggest bulk of work that I do is working around trauma, working around mindset, getting them out of this idea that dating is a chore and that there are no good people left to date. And,
Mhm.
that I have to have 100 messages in order to find the one. I'm like, you don't. You need one message from the one person that you're going to spend the rest of your life with. So it doesn't matter. And I feel like this is obviously more like on the male end of things, right? Because we as women just naturally get more attention. But on the male end of things, it's like I don't get messages or I don't get responses. And I'm like, it doesn't matter. All you need is that one response from the person that you're going to marry.
I think that's so huge. And whether you're talking about like sales or dating, it's like the same thing. It's that fear of like abandonment, fear of rejection, like
Yeah.
crickets kind of moment. And it's like
Oh,
really
absolutely.
vulnerable to put yourself out there and then not receive that. And I love how you're framing that. It's so powerful.
Well, and I mean, like, in a way, like, dating is really just selling yourself. So it's the same thing as like coaching, right?
Mhm.
Like selling coaching, when you're dating, you're selling yourself to a potential future partner. And it's a lot of the same. So like anything that I say about dating is honestly like the same things that I would use when I'm selling my coaching on the social media and stuff like that. It's really just making yourself visible and putting yourself out there. So like one of the things that I like, my little like taglines, right, is like redefining what it means to put your best self forward.
I
Because
like that.
thank you. I feel like we have this idea in the dating world and probably in the sales world too, that there's a certain way that we have to be, or like a certain way that we have to look to attract the right people. So like on the dating site, right, and I feel like even in like social media marketing, it's like I have to wear the right clothes and I have to like have a picture of me like at a wedding or in some sort of formal thing, and then I have to have a picture of me looking like I'm adventurous or like whatever, right? But you don't at all. And I'm going to pull up this picture because I'm going to show you the picture that I had on my dating profile when I went back on the dating sites. And it was so, because the thing is, you find a way to, and this is the other thing that I work with my clients on, is finding a way to show who you are authentically and make it eye catching enough that people, even if they don't message you, they'll stop and be like, okay, let's see what this person is about. And like now, did I at the time? I guess I did at the time, but like now I have fire hair. I guess I don't anymore because of COVID. But
I think it's so amazing because even like if you're not like say on social media, if you're not getting like the likes and comments and stuff, it doesn't mean that people aren't like watching and keeping tabs on
right.
you. And that's like always interesting to me when I'm like, who is this person? Oh wow, they've been following me. I have no idea who they are, there's the lurkers. And I think that's true with dating. And for
Oh,
me, I think it's just so powerful to like rewrite the narrative. That's like what I'm all about, kind of feminist narrative therapy is sort of like we get to be who we are. And like one thing I will say as a therapist for like 15 years watching people is that there literally is someone out there for everyone. I truly believe that. And even multiple people, So it's just like you really can find someone. I think a lot of times people just need
oh,
the reassurance and the permission slip to like go for it.
oh, absolutely. So I'm going to show you this picture. Let
Yeah.
me know if so that was my dating profile picture. And you can't even see my
And a
face. Like
unicorn snuggie.
yeah, you have no idea. You have no idea what I look like. But
No, I might have clicked on that one.
yeah, exactly. And that's exactly who I am. Like, I'm weird, I'm quirky. I do weird things like boudoir shoots and unicorn onesies because that's exactly who
That's what
I
makes it
am.
awesome, yes.
And nobody like, I mean, you can kind of see my body, but you can't even really see my body. So like, and that's not for everybody because not everybody's like me, obviously. But you put up something like that. You put up something that says, "This is me." Exactly as I am, and it encompasses everything that you are. People are going to click on that. They're going to look at that because that is attractive. That is magnetic. It's so funny that you talk about there being somebody for everybody because I work with poly people too.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think I absolutely learned that when I was in the strip club because we had a girl who worked for us. Being in a smaller town, like in a strip club in a smaller town, definitely left it more open to varying types of bodies because I feel like in big cities like Los Angeles and Vegas and everything, they're really looking for like a type. And like each club might have like a different type, but like they're definitely like a stereotype type of like this is a stripper, right? But being in a smaller town, like I had a manager who hired basically everybody because he knew and he was very, very wise that there like somebody likes something and everybody there's something for everybody and you need to have that variety. And there was a girl that I worked with. She was gorgeous, but like she was a really big girl. She reminded me a lot of Lizzo. So like very
Mhm.
like rolls and like just, she was African American and just very big. And I was sitting with a guy once who was not my client. He was actually her client. And he was watching her on stage. And we connected because like my backstory was that I was from Hawaii, which I'm not, but we connected because he was actually from Hawaii. So I was like, let me do my research so we can just have stuff to talk about. And
Look at
he
your
was watching,
character commitment.
I know, right? But he was watching her on stage and he's like, I just love her. She reminds me of one of those anime girls. Like I love watching her dance and all of like when she dances, like all of her body undulating. And he was just like so into it. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay, like not my thing, but like I can see like how you can be into that and why you're into that because the way that he described her, she was just like a fucking piece of art to him. And I'm like, there really is something for everybody and everybody, like someone for everybody, and that was, and I mean, like obviously like on a logical level I knew that, but like that really made it somatic and like made it in my body, like something that I could feel.
Yeah, you know what that makes me think of is I really feel like the dialectic, which means like two opposing things can be
Mhm.
true, that really needs to happen for like this revolution, this like moment in time is that, like inclusion, like we all get to belong and diversity, we all get to be like uniquely ourselves. And that those two things don't have to like, everybody tries to fit in the box to be normal. Like, fuck that. Like, let's just like all be ourselves. We all get to belong. We all get to include. Obviously, like we need to deal with some of the sort of like oppressive patriarchy stuff to get to that point. But I think the more we can like come out with our true selves and like instead of reject people when they're, like when they trigger us or when they have something that we want, we're jealous or envious, instead just like really being like, oh my God, you're doing you. Like that's so amazing.
It's so amazing. And I see
Yeah.
that too. And I know we're both in P school together and like visible AF and everything. Um, and I do see a lot of the women being like, oh, there's so many coaches. Oh, we're all selling the same thing. Oh, is it okay to copy? And the answer is yes, because everybody's a different person with a different personality. And even if like, let's say I'm not, I mean, I'm personally not like business coach, right? But like even if I was took everything that Julia had and copied it completely, like 100%, like it wouldn't be the same and it wouldn't have the same feeling because she is who she is and I am who I am. And the energy will be different and the way that it's presented will be different. I actually learned that in grad school because while I was getting my doctorate, I was also getting my master's in organizational behavior.
Mm.
And one of our assignments, so it was like weekend courses for people who are already working. And one of the assignments was that we all had to do a group report, like a small group report on the Challenger disaster. And people were so upset. They were like, well, we're all just going to have the same information. Like, this is going to be super boring. Like, I don't understand, like, why we have to do this. Like, what are we learning? But it wasn't. I mean, obviously, like, some of the information was the same because, like, it's the Challenger disaster. Some of the information is just going to be the same. But every presentation was completely different because the groups that we were working in contained different people who were interested in different information, who had different views of the world. And I think honestly, like that was one of my more enlightening moments in life, was that you can be doing the same thing and it's not going to be the same at all.
Yeah, and it's kinda like, if you've ever done, like, paint with a twist, it's like everybody's painting the same painting, but it all comes out different because everybody has their, like, unique, flair to it.
Some of us are drunker than others.
Yeah, yeah, and some of us can't really paint, but that's okay. That's what I love about expressive art, and, you mentioned the knitting and some of the stuff early on, the acting, like, I really do feel like a lot of why we have so much pervasive like mental health issues is that people like aren't expressing themselves and they aren't being creative and they aren't taking the time to figure it out because they're just trying to like like check the box of like getting married, getting a house, getting a job, blah blah blah, and it's not ultimately very fulfilling. A lot of people don't want those things. So I guess my final question to you is like, if you were to see this like like kind of fearless feminine revolution to happen, like any ideas on what that might look like? I mean, I feel like we're in it, but like what would you like to see for the future?
I would like to see for the future definitely more balance between the matriarch and the patriarch because
Yes,
both are valuable and both are necessary.
totally.
Uh, I want to see more compassion in the world and empathy and a more definitely more pleasure. Like that's something I have a very heavy masculine energy to me, if you couldn't tell, but definitely more pleasure, which is something that I'm working on. And this idea that it's okay to just be who you are, like this acceptance. Like, so we talk about like, if we're talking about like divine feminine, just kind of being that vessel for people to just be and being okay with just being, because we are such as, at least in the United States, right, we're a very go go go, like the Western world is very masculine energy driven, but I'm always like, can we just be like a little bit more, I mean, I know that Europe is the Western world, but I'm like, can we be a little bit more European where we have like a 3 hour lunch break where we go
Like a
take a nap, and I'm like,
siesta, like a glass of
yeah.
wine, yeah.
Oh my god. And I mean, I don't know about you, but my circadian rhythm definitely falls into that where I get super sleepy like right around this time, like, 2 to 4, and I'm like, I need to take a nap and I need to eat some lunch. And then then I'm ready to go like for another like 3 or 4 hours of work. So like seeing that shift where
Balance.
it's not all work all the time, because what's important is our relationships. What's important is being authentic and being honest with yourself and being comfortable with that.
Yeah, I love that so much. Well, it has been so, thank you for being so vulnerable and authentic and real with your story. And, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. So tell us, like,
Thanks, Megan.
where do we find you? How can we work with you? I think I've got a client or two I can send over to you.
Yeah,
Tell us all the details.
absolutely. So if you want to find me, you can find me on Instagram at Kari Lu Yoga. That's KariLu Yoga. Because pre-COVID, I was a yoga instructor, so
Mhm.
I was working more on that, and then I pivoted. And I actually much enjoy like dating coaching much better. And sometimes coaching involves yoga. It just kind of depends on the client. So you can find me on Instagram. It's the same. It's Kari Lu Yoga on Facebook, but it's really just like plugged into my Instagram. So I'm not super active on there.
Mhm.
Feel free to email me, Kari.cowell@gmail.com. So that's KARI.COWELL@gmail.com. And that's probably like, or you can DM me on Facebook or Instagram. That's really like more like the places you'll find me. At some point, I'll have a website, but right now I'm doing okay. So,
Well, and that's it. I think like redefining, all the things that we should have. Really, like if you're magnetic and you got a little bit of magic and manifestation to you, you could just kind of do it bare bones. And I feel like that's
yep,
really good because then you haven't like sunk a lot of like money and time and effort into like
right.
building this thing that people may or may not want. Like you said, pivoting from yoga to dating, like,
Yeah.
that's huge. And I think this is a huge moment of reinvention for everybody, especially people
Yes.
being affected by COVID. And so I think it's a great time to do the personal growth, like hire a coach, like figure it out. And like you said, way cheaper than grad school, right?
Oh my gosh, way cheaper than grad school. Even like yoga teacher training, which on some for some people is personal growth and not like I want to become a teacher, but I'm just like, man, if I had done this when I was like 17 or even like 25, like I'd be in such a better place financially right now and have way less debt. So yeah, hire a coach, whether it's for dating or business or anything, because it really is like, I think, and it's the same thing with therapy, right? But some people don't need to do like the super deep like childhood trauma work, like I do, or maybe you do. But like coaching, I always call coaching therapy light, because it's having that objective third party who can look at you and be like, have you considered this? Because maybe you haven't, because you're too close to the problem. Like anything that we are fully enmeshed in, which hopefully is your life, like it is really hard to see it from that outside view. It's so important to have that.
Yeah, and I think the thing that's different about coaching is it's really like results oriented. So like I know in my
Mhm.
therapy practice, I'm very like coping skills solution focused along with the depth because I can't just not be deep. But
Right.
I think for a lot of therapists, they're not really like focused on results. And so then it's like rehashing the problems. And I don't really think that that's like very good. That just like steeps you in the identity of like, I'm broken, there's something wrong with me. And so I think for a lot of people, what they're craving is that like positive support that gets them results,
Mhm.
and that could be with a therapist, but I think you're definitely going to find that with a coach.
Yes. I wish I need to like have my friend text this to me, because she's actually in school to be a sex coach. which I'm super excited about for her. But like she had put on her Instagram stories, like, what's the difference between a sex coach and a sex therapist? And it really was more like, you're a coach, you're like a cheerleader, you're a part of a team. It's a more collaborative relationship, whereas therapy is definitely like I don't want to say there's like that wall, because it kind of depends on like how you do your therapy and like what systems you believe in, but there's definitely like more of barrier, because you are working with like a lot of times like those deeper traumas and things that kind of need to be reflected back, whereas like when you're a coach you can just kind of be in it with them.
Yeah, and I think, I would just add that, like, I think at least when I was coming up in grad school, like, I think a lot of it's like fear-based, like,
Mhm.
because you have a license and like you don't want to get sued. Like, I think there's a lot of like parameters and coaching is still like kind of like the wild, wild west. It's like still kind of like
Yes.
unregulated. It's kind of like being a healer. And there's pros
Yes.
and cons to both, but like I do think that there's a certain level of connection that's like very powerful and very deep and like very transformative that comes with coaching, and that's definitely the piece that really appeals for me. So thank
Yeah.
you again for like living your story. Like I really feel like that's just so powerful and just showing that like you can do the thing, and you don't have to like overcomplicate it. I think that's a big thing that I'm totally guilty of, and I just really want to like send women the message that everybody the message that it can really just be simple as like claiming your desires.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't have to be complicated. I think we like to make it complicated because on some level we're like trained to like love the drama. Like that's
Yeah.
something that I had to train myself out of. Cause like even at like I'm horrible. And I mean like right, like I texted you even I'm like, I haven't eaten today. Can we meet at 2:15 instead of 2? But like that's my drama, right? Like I'm just gonna be late to everything. And so I have this stress and I have all these chemicals running through my body, and oh my God, this is my drama, right? Which isn't like I'm not making like arguments with my spouse or anything like that, or getting into like dramatic trysts with my friends or whatever, but like it's still drama. Like when you're late to everything, it's still creating that stress.
Well, just to give you feedback, I really appreciated that because I was like running like a teensy bit late and I was like, oh yeah, like I really want to have good vibes like going on this interview. So like I actually like jumped in the shower, I like changed my clothes, I burned some sage. So like, I was like, oh, look at her. She just asked for what she wanted. Like, and I'm fine with it. So I actually thought that that was like a beautiful moment. It was a good reminder for me. And I was like, oh yeah, I need to do that more often. So I'm not like, so
Yeah.
it's funny, like, like I received it like, oh yeah, that gives me permission to relax, and then like when we think there's something, when we make ourselves wrong for like what we want, that's when we start getting that,
Right.
rush of adrenaline
Right.
and everything. So
Yeah.
we may have to
Yeah.
do a part two because I feel like there's so much we could talk about. So I'm gonna go ahead and sign off here for today. We'll connect all the links and everything in the show notes and get everybody going, and definitely hire Kari. And thank you so much for coming on the Fearless Feminine.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much, Megan. Have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Divine Feminine Revolution podcast. Make sure to subscribe and leave a 5-star review. Want to keep the conversation flowing? Find us on Facebook at the Divine Feminine Revolution Facebook group, where revolutionary women gather to listen to their hearts, monetize their gifts, and change the world.